Be sure to subscribe and like our channel. Well, it's Sunday. We have to record today on our off day because our guest today is a Jew. She just told us fuck off on Saturdays.
Saturdays, screw your Saturdays.
Screw your Saturday. Who wants to record on Saturn's day, the day of death and destruction?
Or Saturn, the worker's god who allows us to rest instead of toiling 7 days a week. You know.
The only rest shall be death.
Well, thank you for accommodating me.
No problem. If people wondered, this is in fact Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole and Queen City Curio Videocast. And where are we at, Zach? Where can you come live to the podcast if COVID actually really ends?
607 Gerrard Street East, Toronto, Ontario, 4th floor, 401.
For now.
That's for now.
For now. But you know what? You never know what happens. We do lots of rituals here, lots of stuff. Sometimes the podcasts just become a ritual. Like you never know. Like when we do the Drunken Christmas podcast, which we do every year, it's been a tradition. It's probably going to degenerate into a ritual of some sort.
Looking forward to the drinking.
Right. Drinking plus ritual equals what? Nah, let's just find out, shall we?
Fun times of getting yelled at by the spirit sometimes, as I know.
Ooh-wee.
Not said. Today, we're actually covering a book that is a re-release in a second edition of an older book that was less known. But,
Ta-da.
There we go. We would actually have, we would actually put that up ourselves. However, Sarah had to buy her own copy of her own book because it just got released.
Well, the deluxe hardback is still in paperback, but I will tell people, so there was apparently a global paper shortage, if you believe that, is why it's a little bit
delayed.
Say
what?
It should start shipping next week, the deluxe hardback. And the paperback just started shipping. I got mine yesterday.
Yeah, I can believe it. There's a lot of shortages.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be, actually speaking, probably a rough Christmas for a lot of people.
Yeah.
What? We can't go on Black Friday and fight it out with other people to get whatever we want from the store because they don't have any things because of supply chain issues. Yep, sorry.
Yeah.
You're going to have peace and love for
this is
Xmas
America.
time.
Once capitalism is threatened, we'll figure it out here.
Technically, me and Zach are in Canada.
You guys in some crazy commie land up there,
Where they
want to care about human beings, but here in America,
I've come to love
let Walmart down.
I've come to love the moose and the maple syrup. I've come to love them both very much. The moose, the maple syrup, but nobody really loves Canadian geese. Nobody.
That might as well be a weapon right there. I actually kind of
love Canada goose.
Oh, okay. I love how they look, but they're just evil.
Oh yeah, they're mean as fuck. Yeah.
They double down.
Yeah. But I mean, I like that.
Canadian goose are sort of like the honey badger of birds.
Yeah, I see that. But goose is like such a powerful witch ally. A Canada goose being like those soft little white fairy tale domesticated goose. That's not a witch bird. Canada goose that'll fuck you up. That's a witch bird.
I think that's some merch right there. We gotta get.
That's it. That's it. Like I got the little deeper down, little mythos from Native American, like the flame rabbit. Now I'm gonna just get goose and put it on a T-shirt and basically say, "Deeper down the rabbit hole." Yeah. As badass as this bird.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you can go that far. You're pretty badass, but as badass as a goose, I don't know, man.
I'm thinking we are. We are. I'm there. I'm willing to take that challenge on. So this book that was actually republished,
yes,
and has a paper shortage now.
Yes. I think that they should be shipping this week. I heard
this week.
I believe the paper problem to now be cured. And so like they
Right,
should
so-
start shipping quite soon.
So the book is the Orphic Hymns Grimoire.
Yes.
And there's some extra stuff added into it that we're going to
Mm-hmm.
kind of talk about. It's published by Hayden, who actually has a fairly good amount of publications. If you're listening, Hayden, we have a lot of your authors. Send us more stuff, right? So there, we said it to them when they listen to it. But this is actually kind of like an interesting book because
Thank you.
it can be used in a lot of different ways.
Mhm.
If you're a hack like me, who's a chaos magician, you could use one at a time.
Yeah, so
If you're serious about this, you could have the whole book as a ritual.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 88 Orphic hymns, right? They cover sort of the whole spectrum of who you would expect a collection of hymns for the Greek gods to cover, plus some extra, like, more obscure gods, I guess. And in particular, right, they're growing out of Orphism. So there's a particular focus on sort of like Dionysus and his retinue, as well as like the Great Mother and her retinue, a little bit more so than like the Olympians, but it's certainly not short on Olympians. There's 3 hymns to Zeus. 4, depending who you count as Zeus and who you don't, right? So there's individual hymns, and I think that's how most people use it. But then additionally, like, something that I think a lot of people don't understand, but will just become clear if you read all the hymns in order, either my translation or any translation, or if you read Greek. If you read them in order, there's a clear ritual sort of structure to all of them in order, right? Where you're going to start with like Hecate and like the birth giver, the midwife, right? And then you'll build, right, sort of like layers of more sort of exoteric power, right? And around the peak, you get to like this string of Dionysus and then Aphrodite hymns, right? And then you sort of like go down into the underworld, right? And there's this more like internal sort of catabasis ritual at the end, right? And then you come back up, right, at the very end. And if you sort of read the hymns in order, you can kind of get the feel for this ritual, which is really like the liturgy of what we would call a bacchanal ritual, right? So there's instructions for doing it as one long ritual in the book, but then there's additionally like some spellcraft suggestions for the individual hymns. And so in this edition, they all have illustrations, right? Let me find so there's just like the page that I happen to open. They all have these sort of coloring book style illustrations. And that's because I at least think it's cool if you color in your own, right? And that sort of gives you this opportunity to take this book and really like charge it up with your own magical intent as sort of a ritual object. You can either color them in your own book, or you can photocopy them out, scan them out, and then color them in sort of individually for spell work. So I do that a lot. A lot of times when I'm using the icons in spell work, like I'll color a new version just for that spell, and like what colors I use. Sometimes I'll like plant sigils inside the illustration. The illustrations are by my BFF and collaborator, Brian Charles, who I think really did an amazing job. There's a lot of really great ones. So the first edition didn't have nearly as many illustrations. So now almost every hymn has its own icon for reasons I cannot fully explain. Hypnos and Oneiros were quite insistent that they wanted to be in the same icon. So there is one icon that has Hypnos and Pasithea and Oneiros in it. But everybody else has their own icon.
As I usually have somewhat of an aversion to the Greek gods in general, except for the Tartarus-based gods.
Well, I also definitely prefer Phonic. I'm not real keen on Olympians myself, in fact.
And I have a lot more experience. And in fact, the article that I just wrote for Become a Living God featured Morpheus over and over, and Nyx over and over again. And it was taking a different take on them. Like they're almost like, yeah, these are somewhat more mercenary than their stories indicate. Like, as in they're not quite so aligned to that upper current as you would think.
And in truth, I would argue none of the Greek gods are as aligned to like sort of the upper crust imperial versions of the Victorian versions of the stories that we all grew up with. Like those are not the kind of like Greek myths for kids that were effectively written by like rich white British dudes and sold to us as kids I think if you told those stories in ancient Greece, almost everybody would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But Orpheus,
actually.
Yeah. And that's one of the things
But I could see why they would want to be together, actually. After having done practical work, I could see why they would want to be together.
Mm-hmm.
Like unless you were doing something really specific, I could see why you would almost write a ritual that chained them all together in weird ways to work with. So to me, it makes perfect sense.
I'm in no way like arguing against working them one at a time. I certainly do.
Oh, no. But I just get why.
Yeah.
From practical experience, why, unless you really have a strongly personal connection to one of them, why they would want to be chained together, or why they would not chained together, but
especially in like group practice. I think honestly, I'm just a big fan of the kind of ritual where you just call spirit after spirit after spirit after spirit, and you're just like throwing a party for anybody who will come. Basically, like I like those.
That's probably why I didn't put them together, because I would never do that.
Yeah.
Unless the intentions really like fits this real engineering narrative of like, this is exactly why I'm doing this combination of stuff. But interesting, like, because you're talking about this, like you could do this, the whole book as one story. And actually in one way, this kind of,
absolutely.
You're starting at the crossroads and then descending into the beginning, or the gateway into the beginning, and then you keep going forward to different aspects of life until you finally get to death.
Yeah. So there's a hymn traditionally sort of like published with the Orphic hymns, although for like linguistic reasons in the Greek, it was probably not written at the same time by the same person, called the Hymn to Musaios, right? Which sort of has this frame at the beginning where, so Musaios is one of the like 4 great bards of ancient Greece, right? So there's like Homer and Hesiod, who are, so Hesiod is like almost certainly a specific historical character. We have like some solid biographical information about him, right? Homer, a little less historical, possibly not a singular person at all. What we talk about as the works of Homer almost certainly developed as an oral tradition and were later written down. But Hesiod, like, we're pretty sure a particular person wrote it down for like reasons I can get into if anybody cares, which you do not, I imagine. Like, and then we have Orpheus, right? And Musaios. And Musaios is sort of the like most mysterious of those. Some people say that Musaios is Orpheus's son. Some people say that that Musaios is Orpheus' teacher. People argue about that as if nobody ever names their son after their teacher. So I don't really understand why. It's probably just both of those things. But the hymn to Musaios.
Because people on the internet love to argue.
It's true. It's
true. I mean, it's the internet.
Yeah, all right. Fair enough.
Because academics love to argue too.
True. You know, some people say Musaios is Moses. I think that's a little silly, but it's kind of a cool idea. Anyway, so the hymn to Musaios starts with this frame story like, learn this ritual. It's the best ritual that has ever been. Right? And it is basically just an invocation of like boom, 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 boom. All of these Greek spirits all in a big row. And really, I mean, all of them, right? Like you start off with some named ones, but then you're just calling like, you know, the spirits of the air and the spirits of the water, like the good spirits and the bad spirits. You just call in everybody, right? And my guess would be, right, that, you know, these hymns are generally used by sort of a category of magician called an Orpheotelestai, which is like a wandering Orpheus initiator, right? So like this isn't a priest that like you would go to their temple. They just like show up in your village one day and do kind of whatever priesting needs doing, right? They're not necessarily dedicated to like a particular bit. And so my guess would be that this Musaios hymn is like the first one that you memorize because it's sort of good for all purposes.
Yeah, you just do it and you walk into the village, go on for about 2 hours, and the village is blessed by all the various spirits.
Exactly.
You get paid. You go.
Right.
You get paid. You get your food and your gold pieces, and you leave.
Yep. Exactly. And that's how I understand sort of the hymn to Musaios is as sort of like training wheels. Like you learn that one first, and then eventually you learn the rest of them. Also, I mean, it really is a beautiful.
I think Sarah's internet just paused, slowed down real bad for a second there.
Oh.
That's okay.
Hmm.
It's
Are
okay
we
now.
back now?
We are back.
You are good now.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what. I probably didn't say anything worthwhile.
No, it's
No,
good.
you were saying you
roll.
were on a roll, right? And
You
that
were
was
on a
clearly
roll.
an internet hiccup there, because we just saw you go
Oh, so we're like
that. It looked like that.
yeah,
It was like,
it looked like that.
Well,
So,
I await
out
the
of-
video. I'll get to watch all my ridiculous faces.
right. So at the end, we're going to talk about the Facebook Live too for everyone.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, because we have some announcements at the end. But who was your favorite one to write the hymn for? And you can pick, let's say, the top three, so you don't have to pick
Okay.
one. You're going to anger
Maybe
anyone.
Fusis, I really okay. So just from the experience of like writing them, these aren't necessarily like my favorite spirits. I do think I will say that like I think a close reading of the book, you can tell which ones are my favorite. Like I tried really hard. I did my best for everybody, but I do think that you will discover that like the hymns to say like Hecate and the Great Mother and Persephone and like Wild Dionysus are perhaps a little better than my hymns to like say Athena and Apollo and other like very prim
Olympian,
and proper
yeah.
gods who are like
Now, we talked about that
you
a
know
little. Like,
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
like
So I think
all the gods you actually mentioned, all the Greek gods you mentioned, I actually have in the past worked with every single one of them. And they all have the tendency that they're not Olympians.
yeah, I mean, and it's not like I hate the Olympians. I'm just saying they're like I am broadly maybe like not imperially approved as a human being. And you know, Orphism wasn't either, right? Like if you read contemporary sources on Orphism, like Plato thinks that Orphism is garbage for like garbage people, women and slaves and foreigners and other undesirables who are like stirring up political trouble. And I'm like, oh, that's my people. I get it. Okay.
I was thinking,
That's
that-
me.
Yeah.
that sounds like us.
That sounds
Yeah.
like us.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times the like politics in Greek mythology and in the ancient world in general is really occluded. I think for very obvious reasons, right? Like I think we get a story that is like approved by like rich fancy people with a lot of education in the ancient world, and I think that doesn't necessarily reflect the actual lives of everybody. So like Homer, I mean a substantial amount of Homer is political propaganda.
Yep.
And like, and
Send
I
your
don't
hate
mean,
mail to Sara@witchlessons.com.
yeah, right. But I mean, I just think that's a fact. I mean, I love Homer, right? He's an amazing poet. He tells us beautiful things, but like his voice is one voice among many, and the nature of historical progress is that like we hear some of those voices more than others.
I think that's a very interesting point. And I think you're kind of hitting on something I never really vocalized about. I've often myself theorized there's a greater divide in the stories between what seems like all the entities that are more primordial or Tartarus based and Olympians, and they don't seem they're smushed together, but the stories don't really, they fit but they don't. Like it's kludgy of a fit. It's sort of like
Yeah. You know, it's complicated, right? Partly like what we talk about as ancient Greece is actually like, you know, thousands of
city-states.
years, and it's everywhere from southern France to northern India. Like that's not one cohesive thing. Like it's a lot of different people doing a lot of different things at different times in different places in different ways. But also I think one of many names for like bard, priest, magicians, like sort of that category of person, right? I talked about Orpheotelestai as one word for it, but like sort of the normative word for that, like the whole category, is a rhapsode, right? And rhapsode means a stitcher of stories. Like that's their job, right? They take stories and piece them together. And I think that like I agree that presents some problems, but I think what is more problematic is like this idea that we have in our culture, an idea I think is rooted almost entirely in Christianity, about the idea that there is like some singular correct way to read a text or some singular correct text. Right? And so I think that like when you come to Greek mythology with that idea, like it doesn't make any sense.
I think that's an interesting observation, actually, that probably is true. Although Christians don't have a singular view of what they're reading at all. But they think they do.
I mean, most of them aren't reading anything. I don't want to get up a whole high up on my translator horse, but I mean, my experience of Christian Bible translations is that they are sometimes unrelated to the source material they are translating. And I have a lot of sympathy for loose translation, right? Like I too am writing a loose poetic translation, but I feel like I'm very upfront about that fact. Like I footnote when I'm like, this is not really what the Greek says, by the way. Let me think of an example. So like the hymn to Heracles extols him for like putting down the savage races. And I was not there for that. Like that's not a thing I'm willing to like put my bard magic power behind. So I changed it to just like putting down savagery. But I footnoted it. Like I was very clear that I did that.
Yeah.
You know? And I didn't do that a lot. Like that's I would say that's maybe like the place where I really just flat out changed what it said in a way that like I am sure the original author would not approve of my change. That one, there's like maybe one other one where Apollo is extolled for like keeping the races separate. Maybe the species, it's unclear. The word I chose to translate as species. I chose to translate it as species and highlight it as like preserving biodiversity, but I don't actually think that's what the original author meant. Right? But like I guess, translating is a really complicated. Here's what I will say. I will say I do not believe a literal translation of sacred poetry to be possible, nor do I think it is desirable. I think literality maybe like fails to understand the essential nature of what poetry is. Right? And that's what I would say about Bible translation as well, truthfully. That like
But actually that's relevant to this book, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big introduction about like I talked a lot actually about my translation sort of philosophy in the introduction to this book. And one of the things I talked about is, I work very closely with the spirit. I really think of like, at least these days, my sort of primary magical role, right, is my primary public-facing magical role. Like there is a difference between what I do in my real life and what's for sale.
That was a huge caveat right there, right?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, yeah, I'm a person and I got my own life that's not for sale, that I don't put up on podcasts. Like, if you want to know me, you're going to have to actually know me, right? But in terms of what I do in a public-facing way, like, I think of my primary role as a hermeneutes, right? Which is this ancient Greek word. You can hear that it's like related to the god Hermes. I like to translate it Hermes O not, because that's what it sounds like in English. It's usually translated as like interpreter or go-between, right? And I think of that as my role, right? Like I translate for the spirits. Like I help the spirits speak human and I help humans speak spirit. Right. And that really informs like my philosophy of translation. Like I tried really hard to, what I am trying to do in these hymns is like, if Orpheus were writing today in our world for like an English speaking audience, a modern pagan English speaking audience, like I want to like sort of inculcate the same feeling, like the same mystic trance state in that modern reader that the original hymns, I think, were designed to instantiate in ancient Greek. That's always my goal when I'm translating. That's my goal when I translate Orphic Hymns. It's my goal when I translate like Solomonic Pentacles. Like whenever I'm translating, my goal is always to like, the essential nature of communication, right? Written or spoken communication, like this, or even like non-language, like the essential feature of like art and stuff. But I feel like that requires some translation, right? I do think sometimes that requires some cultural translation, but not as much as language. The goal of communicating is to make the communicatee like think and feel things they were not thinking and feeling before that communication. That's what communication is. It puts ideas in somebody else, right? It takes something out of my mind and my heart and puts it in your heart and mind. And so I think like I am more interested in the result of that communication than I am in like the form of that communication, if that makes sense. So that's why I don't do like super literal translations. It's why they're in heroic meter, which is like the meter that Americans are accustomed to hearing ancient Greek translations in, as opposed to dactylic hexameter, which is what the actual ancient Greek is in, but it's like a weird meter in English. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was a really long rambly
No, there's
commentary,
no,
like
it's
very
all good.
technical.
Well, actually, you're actually saying here is that each of these translations is partially derived not just from the literal translation, but it's partially derived from a personal experience.
Oh yeah,
So-
absolutely, absolutely.
so
like,
really, it's not more authentic, but it's possibly more useful, as
Yes.
in like the translations are directly coming from a place of actual experience with them.
you know,
And
yeah, I think that's true, but I don't want to get too high on my horse and say like mine are the only. Like, there are 4 major translations in English. Thomas Taylor, who's like the classicist who did that, like if you look up Orphic Hymns on the internet, that's whose translations you're gonna read. You know, he was for sure a genuine pagan. Like, his contemporaries referred to him as Taylor the Pagan. There was a rumor that he sacrificed a goat in his backyard every time he started a new translation. So like, I believe like Thomas Taylor also has like a genuine. Patrick Dunn is another like, you know, for real magician working with a genuine thread. Athanasakis, I don't know anything about that guy, so I can't comment. He certainly, nothing about him. Were he to publicly be called a pagan, I think he would deny it. Is he? I mean, I don't. It's not my business to tell other people their business. Like, I don't know anything.
well,
But like, I do
we
think
can't
that
really
there's a real, yeah.
we can't really speak to those others because they're not on the show.
Fair
But we can speak to your use of that versus kind of the classical translations that we can get. Because there are classical, non-modern versions of these translated Orphic Hymns from
Yeah, that's the Thomas
like from
Taylor
classical
translation I was talking about.
yeah, from academic sources. And
Right.
that's why in some cases, like I was actually saying this was actually a good thing. Like,
No,
not
I mean, I
necessarily
think it's a good thing
like,
too.
yeah, like it's sort of like it's not necessarily like well, in part it would matter because essentially it's if people don't like you, they're probably not going to like the energy of the translations.
I think that's
But-
probably true.
But it
But
also
how could
sort
you
of
not like me?
I know, right? I mean,
I know.
but on the flip side of that, it is also sort of these translations are not coming from a blank slate, like a blank academic slate in your particular place.
No, these
So,
are
like, the
gods
other
I've
authors-
been in relationship with my entire life. These are gods I grew up with. These are the gods of my ancestors. Like, these are, you know, when I was like 13 and just getting started in witchcraft, I read a book. I'm embarrassed. I don't even know what the book is actually called. I just call it Buckland's Big Boo Book of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. I think it's called like Buckland's Guide to Witchcraft or something.
Oh, it is? Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah,
Buckland's.
y'all know what book I'm talking about. It's
Yeah, we
giant
do.
and blue. It has a pen.
Yeah.
Buckland's Big Blue
Yeah.
Book of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. That's what we used to call it. And that book told
That
me
would
I
have been
needed.
a better name for that book, I think.
You know, of books that were available at the time, I could have done worse. Like, it did right by
No,
me.
actually, I mean it's
not.
actually a decent.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
It's
not.
decent
actually a good
book.
book. But
Yeah,
I'm,
I think-
I'm saying your name is
Yeah,
a better
I
name.
agree.
I think that
Yeah,
would be.
but
I
yeah.
think so too.
I would. I
Well,
think
feel
it's
free
better.
to, feel free to call it that. I didn't. Anyway, they told me I needed one lord and one lady, and so I swore myself to Hermes and Hecate, which now looking back is definitely not what the Wiccans meant by lord and lady. Like, that's like the genderqueerest pairing I could have put into their heteronormative slot. But you know what? That's been going great for me. Like, I don't regret swearing to them. That's been fabulous this whole time. Right? So yeah, I have like a long relationship with these spirits. But of course, as we were saying, some of them more than others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's useful though to hear like how a book comes about, right? To
It is.
know that the author. I mean, there's so many books now, and
Yeah.
we're not going to speak about anyone, but there's so many books. But it's just useful to know, like, this is coming from first a place of love, and second, it's coming from a place where you had actually summoned each one of these spirits.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah,
not
absolutely.
big summoning. Maybe it was a small summoning because you're not into them, but you at least did it. And
Oh no,
and
I
what-
definitely did it. Truthfully, I am not a good enough poet to do this any other way. Like, I don't know how I possibly would have done. Like, I mean, my Greek is fine. I am not like a fluent speaker of ancient Greek. I would maybe question anybody who claims to be fluent in a ancient language. But my Greek is fine, right? So like I could translate them, but I'm a writer. I put words in order, but no, this is definitely like a divinely inspired work for me. Is
Right,
that
which
inspiration
definitely makes
true or
it-
not? I can't say.
Well, for somebody who has taken oaths to reject truth, let's just leave that one alone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming.
But
Especially in poetry. What does that even mean?
but let's say it is authentic, which also leads to the style of art you talked about earlier.
Mhm.
So you have words that were channeled from you,
Mhm.
right? And you have art that is kind of coloring book. It leads to exactly what you were saying.
And
It's
also,
not
I think
too hard.
The artist is also like, we live together, the artist and I. So he's also
well, there you
there for those
There you go.
conjurations. And sometimes it's like me drawing a stick figure, but most of the time, right? Like sometimes I'm not very visual. So every once in a while, I would get like a clear idea of what they look like. But for the most part, right, he just like,
Right. So
honestly, I have no idea. Like he just magically is like, oh, this is obviously what this spirit looks like. And I'm like, okay, cool.
All right, cool.
Right.
Yeah, and I love them. There's
and-
so many super cool ones.
to me,
Pan
that's
is
almost
a
like a
favorite
way
of
of
mine.
saying like you could do exactly what you're saying, especially if you have the hardcover, where you could
Mhm.
do a couple of the rituals and then kind of color them in, or
Yeah,
use
absolutely.
herbs with inks to kind of color
Mhm.
them, because everything in there has been derived. There's a translation process, but it's somehow touched the hand of human consciousness, and it's
Yeah,
been done
absolutely.
in ritual. Like, so all of these different artworks, although they're simple artworks, they are quite also inspired and sort of allow you to actually fill them in and kind of take this kind of pre-published grimoire and make an actual grimoire.
That's how
Yeah.
I think about it. Like that gives you this opportunity. Because like I don't know if you guys have ever seen me try to draw something, but I'm like really quite bad at it. So like for me to try and draw my own icons would totally fail. And I think, a lot of us are maybe in that boat, but I really feel like coloring them in gives you this way. It's like a really deep meditative thing, right? Because it takes quite a while, but it doesn't really take that much. Like you can chant while you do it. And so that's something I often do, right? Is just repeat the hymn over and over while I color, repeat the hymn a couple of times, and then like just talk directly to the icon. There's an appendix in the back that like gives some sort of like crunchier details about working with icons. And also, in modern Greek practice, right, in Greek Orthodox Christian practice, there's this really like large, beautiful tradition of icon work that like, Christianity as we think of it today is indigenous to Greece. So that unlike in some other areas where it like conquered and replaced the pre-existing paganism, there's like this slow transformation, right? From particularly Orphism feeds pretty directly into Christianity, right? There's this progression. And that's one of the things I find interesting because, look, I know a lot of people are really interested in pagan reconstruction, and I'm not here to tell them they're doing it wrong. I'm just saying, for me personally, I am much more interested in post-Christian paganism than I am in pre-Christian paganism. Like, I am interested in learning about the past so I know how to move forward, right? And I think Greece gives a really interesting opportunity for seeing how it developed in a way that lets you spiral it back.
And actually speaking, like, even when I look at, let's pick on Hecate, who picks on me a lot.
Yeah, she does.
Often. This is the first image that I've ever seen of Hecate presented where I can say, finally, there's an image that I think, finally, we would do this if we could get out the book.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, again, I just got mine yesterday, guys.
But I mean, here's the first image where I'm like, finally, Hecate presented as a goddess who can rip your nuts off.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, all the perspectives of Hecate have this, there's no teeth here. Like,
right.
And that's not my interpretation of the entity. It is not my experience of the entity. Now, that said, Hecate never wants to rip me apart. She more wants me to enter into a sort of like working sort of arrangement. But that said, I've never got the sense that this was it's not that it's not a benign entity. It's just that it's not completely benign. As in,
she's,
it's ambiguous.
Brian, the artist, says about this illustration that the reason she has short hair is because she's got shit to do. And I feel like that really encapsulates this icon of Hecate for me. I will say, for whatever reason, when I color it, she always has purple hair. I can't justify why I do that, but I always
I can.
Purple hair.
I understand why.
Yeah.
I'm
I
not
get
very
it right
visual,
off the bat.
so.
I get it.
Yeah.
Because it's traditionally the color of the dead.
Oh, I guess that makes sense.
I totally get the purple hair because of that.
All
The
right,
metaphor
cool.
totally,
I feel
totally
validated.
clicks right there.
Boom.
As I said, I'm
But I
not
just
very
like-
visual.
But to me, I just like the fierce look because this is
Mhm.
actually a different take on Hecate than you classically see. The
Well, see, I
technical
feel
class on Hecate is all. It's tied to the three phase goddess.
I mean, you say
the three-faced
traditional, but
goddess.
like that idea of Hecate is less than 100 years old. Like Hecate,
I know that.
Like, see, I feel you're right. I feel like our image of Hecate is very much in keeping with ancient images, and not very much in keeping with the like Barbie doll Hecate statues that I see on the market, which I find
I mean, I think
quite often.
me, Hecate- I mean, this is why I'm saying it's even more important that we're talking about how you came to the process, because
Yeah.
to me, this fierce Hecate that will destroy a village is more correct in my personal experience than the Barbie dolls. Now, that's not to say Hecate will destroy every village. That's not the type of goddess.
Yeah.
But the
But
one
she
that
could.
in the eyes, the capability is there if it's there, right?
Yeah. I agree. And I mean, I think she is much more likely to destroy a palace than a village. That's my kind of
Correct.
god,
That's
you know.
probably,
I think-
probably true. Probably
I know
true.
I'm preaching
All
to the choir on this one, but for everybody listening, I hear like so many people maybe miss the point that a crossroads god is a god of crossroads people, like people who live on the streets. That's who Hecate is a goddess of, right? Like thieves and homeless people and prostitutes and
And merchants.
peddlers and
And
merchants and like, you know, people who live at the crossroads, right? Like who genuinely live in the streets. That's what it means to be a god of crossroads, right? Is that like that's who you're there for, in my opinion.
And yeah, and like there is a certain level of, you know, because Hecate is also tied to the underworld so greatly, and that's also sort of washed over. Like
Yeah, I mean, she's a queen of the dead, absolutely.
right, exactly. And people expect that what does that mean? Like, well, I mean, I could tell stories, but I don't know if people want to hear them. My dreams with Hecate, where like I'm an old style necromancer raising hundreds of dead, like at one time, right? And it's clearly her who's giving me the power to do that in the dreams. I sort of, I would, if I was playing D&D, that would be like a wisdom check. Do you alignment check right here? Check your alignment. Do you stay chaotic neutral or not right here? Or do you go to chaotic evil right here with this stream?
Well, you know, I'll tell you my alignment is that I am in service to she of liminality, learning, and liberation. And I think a lot of people sometimes confuse order for goodness.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would
So
agree.
like I feel like maybe chaotic neutral all the way, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Maybe
there's like
chaotic
so
good.
many.
I don't know.
I
I
think on a
generally
good
reject
day-
other people's opinions on what is good and what is evil.
I think on a good day, I might go to chaotic good. But I mean, there's so many takes of this. Like, there's different takes where this book will definitely, if you're into Greek stuff and the classic Greek internet stuff, will challenge some of your assumptions. Now, this Hecate picture, like I pointed out, to me, I'm pointing it out because it's like I sort of have a relationship with the spirit. The spirit would like a much deeper relationship. Everything I see on the internet, even with some famous people, I'm not too keen on. And this picture, I'm saying this is much closer to me of my
I think
personal
so.
experience.
I mean, this is pretty much how I think of her. I will say I was really intrigued by his, like, you know, he's got her in this cross-armed pose. I will say that when I work with this icon in ritual, she opens her arms. Like, that's how I can tell when it took, is when she opens her arms.
That's when you can tell that you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is also a tension period, and if you think about a knife strike,
Mhm.
you would you would be condensed like this, and
Yeah.
then you'd go across. So that is a threatening position to me, actually.
No, I agree.
A somewhat threatening, or there's a threat implied in the cross position if you know anything about knife fighting. And I got it. Like, and I dig it. It isn't an active threat, but it could be.
But it could be,
right?
yeah. And I mean,
Absolutely.
Hecate, Hecate is beautiful and beneficent and generous, and like in my life, she has never been anything other than a blessing. But I mean, she will fuck somebody up if they need to be fucked up. And we got a lot of people in the world right now who could use a little fucking up, in my opinion.
But if we extend that past Hecate, I bet there's probably a lot of entities in here. That there's a certain vibe that you'd get from the internet research that now that these things are actually sort of, you've worked with them and you're kind of putting your own spin on the translation images, I would bet that there is a lot of entities in the hymns and in the picture that doesn't quite match what people would expect.
I think so. Partly, a lot of our representations just aren't white. So here's a random page. This is Dike Asune, the goddess of righteousness. Those are loaves of bread she's holding, by the way. Trying to think which else. Let's just open it and see who wants me to show you.
Bucklemancy right here.
Oh, okay. This one is a little Barbie doll, but I love it. It's Semele, Dionysus's mother.
Yeah.
Right? I think she so often gets played as this like little demure thing that like, oh, I got burnt up to a crisp. But like, Semele is the goddess of transformation, right? Like Dionysus, she ascends, like after he's born, he rises her to like godhood. Like she's the mother of Dionysus, so she definitely can't be like a little wisp, So no. I really love that, right? And that idea of her there in Zeus's hand. Oh, I love that picture. Let's see.
Spinning through the book to pick a random one. Let's go. Who is it going to be?
Let's go.
This is maybe my favorite one. This is was in the first edition as well. This is Heracles. I love how like superhero-y he is. That's one of my favorites. So honestly, I really love almost all of them. Like I have favorites, but yeah, I think Chase did an amazing job, like really capturing the essence of some of these views, especially some of the ones that like you don't see pictures of that often. Like some of them we didn't really have any references. So Hecate, right? We have, tons of images of her, both traditional images and these more modern images. And like, we could sort of look through them and be like, I like this and not that and blah, blah, blah. But some of them, like we don't really have any iconographic tradition for them at all. And those, I think he did really amazing and fascinating things with. And I like that they're not all too anthropomorphic, right? Like a lot of the older gods, so like, I'm trying to think. Like Gaia is a tree. Like it's got a face, but she's a tree. And I really like that one. Anyway, yeah, I think they're amazing. I think he did a really good job of like, in a way that like as a non-visual artist, I can't imagine just like taking a god and turning it into a picture.
The picture you showed of Heracles, I love it because it's like, yeah, he's got this superhero look to him, but he's also got the I'm about to start some shit from God look. Like he's got a look like I'm about to start some shit, not because I really need to be a superhero right now. It's time for a bar fight look. Like, and that's exactly how my reading of the ancient stories actually goes for that. Like, absolutely, kind of like that. Like, totally, like I'm about to start, but not necessarily in a mean spirit. Like I'm about to start some shit to kill people. It's like, nah, we're just gonna have a bar fight right now. Let's go, just for fun.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite of the icons. It's so like, and I feel like we often see Heracles in this very like unemotional sort of stoic way, which is totally the opposite of his stories, where like that dude goes mad and murders people a lot.
Yes, he does.
Like I like that he's like a person with like he's very human, right? Compared to some of the other images. Like I was saying, where's somebody who's like not very human? So here's Tethys, like grandmother ocean, right? And I like that she's barely anthropomorphic.
Mhm.
You know, whereas Heracles, a hero, is like very much like that's a human being in that picture. Anyway, I could show off these icons all day. I really love them. I think he did an amazing.
They are beautiful. They are beautiful.
Yeah, they really inform my practice so much. Like I if nothing else, like even if we weren't making from them for the book, I'm happy I have all of them now to play with in my magic.
Right, and the thing also with your personal twist too is you do add the spell work for some of the deities.
Yeah,
right?
A lot of the deities have spells that go with them. And I tried to give like I wanted to give like sort of a sampler, right? So there's a lot of different like styles, right? So there's some like PGM translations and some PGM translations and like adaptations, and then there's some more like much more sort of modern chaos magic style magic. There's like a Demeter one that's a very sort of traditional like make and launch a sigil kind of a thing. And I tried to show a lot of different ways to use the icons, right? So like Demeter's holding a basket, you can draw things in her basket. That's what I do in that sigil hymn. So yeah, I wanted to show like a lot of different examples so that, but all of the sort of kinds of spells I show, like, you know, if you know what you're doing, you could easily adapt each type to any of the other hymns for like different purposes, right? I try to show a lot of different ones.
Yeah, especially with the Hephaestus one, I found it like it was like good. It's like this is how you get it, and this is how you keep it. I was like,
so there's
Hephaestus.
Hephaestus. There's one for like getting a job and one for keeping a job that you could easily adapt to lots of other sort of circumstances. One for getting and one for keeping.
It's interesting too because I think it's near the end of the book. You describe basically some advice on how to create your own Orphic hymns.
Yeah, so this is something that's new in the second edition. There's an appendix at the end to write your own because, you know, there are spirits that like I wish had an Orphic hymn that didn't. And so the one in the example is the South Wind. So I think in our culture, we always think of there being 4 winds, but that's actually a relatively late Roman tradition. Like in Greece, there were often only 3, and there's only 3 like wind hymns. But I know a lot of people work with the 4 hymns. I know like Jason Miller's Akate Arcana, I think has like a 4 winds. I don't know. I haven't taken that course, but I gather from people who have, and just from talking to Jason, that he's got like a specific kind of 4 winds thing going on there. So that's the one I decided to write, was a hymn for the South Wind. And I sort of just talked about my practice, which is basically kind of like you outlined, right? Like first I'm going to do some research about like what's available about the spirit, read whatever there is, and then I'm basically just going to make an invocation first to the muses, right? Because I want the muses there when I write poetry, right? And then an invocation of Orpheus because I'm writing Orphic hymns, right? And then an invocation of that particular spirit, and then I just write a poem, basically. I mean, there's not like the actual writing itself, there's not.
Right.
I'm just writing a poem, like the way a person does that. And I imagine other people have their own ways of doing that. Like, I'm not here to tell people how they should write poems.
But I mean, it's good to have a ritual framework too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
Actually come about it. So
yeah, right. That sort of gets you in the place. And then it's just, I mean, from that point on, it's just a writing exercise. And it's a writing exercise. Like, people should understand that, like, you know, I'm writing these in trance, but that's not a final version, right? I'm writing them in trance, and then like a poet, I'm spending hours and hours and hours moving commas around and changing words and fixing the meter and like all the things you do in writing, like in a technical way. Yeah. Like, I guess what I'm saying is my poems don't come out this way the first time.
Well, in a way that doesn't matter. Like, you have there's a big separation between what you might use personally and what goes on to a published piece for public consumption.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for your personal private practice, for them, it might be good enough to have the raw version that they use. Yeah,
absolutely. Although, I mean, I would always encourage everybody to like do your best. Like, when you're making magical tools, you should make them as well as you can. Right.
Right, but like, yeah, so yeah, definitely go over it. But I think even having a ritual framework that somebody could choose much lesser or just forgotten um, Greek entities
Yeah,
and daemons.
absolutely. And I also really encourage people to change the hymns that are there. So in particular, the way they're structured, almost all of them, is that there's like basically a list of like qualities of the spirit, like a list of names and epithets, and then a list of like historical, like little snippets of their myth. Sometimes in English, the way I'm translating it makes it not always clear which of those things it was in Greek because they kind of overlap. But then at the end, there's like a request. And in the Orphic, the way I translate them, that's almost always the final couplet, but sometimes like 4 of the last lines. And you can just take those out and put in your own couplet or like change the couplet. So for example, like when I'm doing the hymn to Hygeia, I just rewrite the last 2 lines to like name the specific person I am working for healing for. Right. And I really want to encourage people to do that, right? Like if it's not work, like make them your own. Spells want to be cast, like poems want to be read. Like that's what they're for, is to be used. Like get your hands dirty with them.
Excellent. So, Sarah, with that, do you have anything coming up?
Let's see.
Since we are at 5 feet, almost done.
Okay. I just started teaching a new divination course called Learning How to Know. There's still time to sign up for that. It's at witchlessons.com along with all my other stuff. My next in-person event will be the Sacred Space Convention in Maryland, which if I was better at marketing, I would know the dates of. It's like the first weekend in April, I think. Maybe the second weekend in April. Like 6 through 10 or something like that. And I think that's sacredspaceconvention.com, I think. That's close. Google will know what you mean.
Google knows.
Yeah, Google will know.
Excellent. So, Zach, go ahead.
I was going to say, I hear you guys have something coming up as well.
We have a few things coming up.
We have a few.
Exciting.
Some more interesting than others. So take us away, Zach. What do we got going on?
On our docket list, next week we have a Kate panel. Right, so we have some secret guests that everyone will see, and then from there, secret.
There's a Kate artist and poet thing. You just don't remember all the names. That's it. Right? On the website, but you just don't remember. Just admit
either way. Next week, that's our sponsor. Well, that's not the sponsor. That's a public show, and then for our sponsor show in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a dumb supper. And then from there...
That does not mean stupid. That means silent, which is kind of ironic that we're going to be talking about a dumb supper.
That's what we do for Halloween in my circle as well,
so,
is dumb supper.
Okay, but yes, we're going to do an actual dumb supper, and we're going to actually get food. And then after we walk through everything, it'll be quite silent and meditative and for the sponsors, and we'll show you how to get past the digital bridge, as it were, to participate. And I'm sure the sponsors will actually feel something that'll be a necessary break from the tarot that we've been doing for the last few weeks, where I pretty much blew everyone's mind and freaked them out with how much Kabbalah I know. Like they were a little shocked that, hey, you're a chaos magician. What the hell? Like, yeah, about that.
Ceremonial magic. Ceremonial magic. So
and
we have that.
And then what else? What is the big thing coming up?
The big thing. November.
Well, the first big thing. There's a second big thing, too.
Well, which one you're referring to? I know the 26th
first one.
ones. Is that the 26th one you're referring to?
Yep.
Yeah, so the big one is we are having a full day event November 26th from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that's to document and do a showing of a documentary we did about New Orleans voodoo ritual where someone was connecting to their grandparent on that. So we're going to be doing a showcase on that. However, we have a fox ritual at 10 p.m. We're doing Reiki and divination healings throughout the whole time. We got Qigong, and we also have the showing of our new dead altar that day also. So it's a full day event, free.
Yeah, we should say a few things about this. This is a documentary produced by York University, which is a Canadian Toronto University, major university, that filmed our whole ritual. And actually, interesting enough, everyone at the ritual had very odd experiences. None of the people who were part of the ritual, they were not practitioners. They were not in the New Orleans voodoo ritual. They were in because they're there, but they're not practitioner magicians. And every one of them had, I would say, uncomfortable experiences, which cast a new light of reality on them in part. So that's 5 people who have no magical experience who said something happened in that place, which I consider that to be my work is done for this week. As far as that ritual goes, I achieved what I need to achieve, but it's a very interesting documentary that actually combines us talking about magic in a sensible way, which you don't often hear with the actual ritual, and talking about this person's experience who is not a magician that actually made contact with your grandfather more than once, even when we were practicing. And the reason that the part of that is also we're doing a public altar. We have public shrines here at our store, as in you don't have to come into our place and spend money. There's going to be a multi-denominational altar to the dead being unveiled on that in this event as part of the event, where you could just come to 607 Gerard Street. Even if we're closed, you just go to the hallway, the building's open, you walk upstairs, and you can pray to your own ancestors. And we consecrated a mirror in the last ritual for that purpose of that you just open the mirror and you can kind of stare into it and talk to your own ancestors. If you don't have the space, there's a public service. Anyone can come there. You don't have to pay us. Like, you just come here and you can just use the mirror whenever you want. There's no real restrictions on it. If the building's open, you can come here. If the building's closed and we happen to be here and you just text us and say, we would like to use the altar if we can, I have a real issue, we'll come down and open the door for you. And we're here late. So I think that's awesome. A relatively cool public service thing,
I wish I lived closer.
I know you'd be here all the time. You'd be and that's one of the public shrines that is the first is going to be revealed. The first one that we're actually going to have done, and that's going to be revealed on that day, or it's going to be open for business starting in that event. And of course, as Zach said, there was going to be a fox ritual, which leads into the second big event we have coming up, the Day of Fox Magic Workshop. That's right. A Chinese fox magic workshop where we're going to go balls to the wall on Taoist magic, fully in crazy ways, and to teach people how to actually work the whole system with foxes from a Taoist perspective. There it is.
There we go.
There we go. Appears on the screen. There it is.
There it is.
So we have those major things. We haven't quite set the date for the Fox Workshop, but it's going to be in early January. That's why we haven't quite set the date.
However, if you want to be on the wait list, do email Andrieh or myself, and we'll put you on there.
Yes, please.
Right. Yep. Outside of that, we don't have any events we're going to. But if you'd like us to attend, let us know.
Cool.
After that, as we always say every week, everyone stay safe and well. We will be back next Saturday for the Hecate panel, which should be quite interesting.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on.